this founder and car we will talk about strategy once this fuel, either gasoline or diesel or also electricity, is becoming more and more expensive. You still have to work, but as an entrepreneur you might have some things to consider. One of the things to consider is, of course, drive at times that you have less traffic jams. Less traffic jams will improve the fuel economy of your car because you don't have to start-stop all the time. That's a good thing. The other thing, of course, is that if it is possible, and there's a new mindset also due to COVID, that you can plan meetings online. This can also save a lot of fuel, of course, because then you don't have to travel all the time. So that's a new methodology that you can add to your tools. Another thing to consider is that there are alternative ways of moving around. Of course, you can use public transportation, but even if you're not that much of a fan of that, like me, for example, you can use your bike to do a part of the traveling. I also have a motorcycle. Motorcycle is very often beneficial because it gets quite a good fuel economy, and also you can park them almost everywhere and also often for free or for a limited amount of money. So even if you cannot completely wipe out the fuel bill, you still have the benefit that the parking bill, which are also becoming insane, sometimes 8 to 9 euro an hour in some regions in the Netherlands, that you can manage that amount and you can drive a huge amount of distance even with this fuel prices on that amount of money that you would then pay for just parking. Parking is not costing anything almost. So there are some things that you can consider. Other things that you can consider is, for example, if you have colleagues and you drive to a similar location, you can carpool, so one picks the other one up, or you can make an appointment that you have a specific location where you drive to, and then you switch to the other car, or they come sit with you, and then of course can also decrease the fuel bills. If you have 4 person in a car, you would have to drive exactly the same distance. It would be the 25% about, but more realistically, normally you would of course have to a little bit of detour, etc. So it might cost you 35% if you are able to put 4 persons into the car instead of driving yourself all the time. So there are some things that you can consider to decrease the amount of money that you spend. It can also be very cozy and helpful. It could also be counterproductive, of course. If you're having calls with clients that are of a nature that needs confidentiality, of course this is not a thing that you should apply to. There are other ways to approach this, but if you want to have a talk and they also are there to express their feelings or other things that are bothering them, of course it should not be that the other persons are listening into that. So it really depends on the situation. Another thing, of course, that you can consider is getting a different car with better fuel economy, or an electric car. Oftentimes it is cheaper, especially if the distance is not that long. And also electric cars have a lot less cost when you look at maintenance. But the upfront cost, even with subsidies by the government or whatever, are often higher than internal combustion engine. In the Netherlands they have a system that they punish you extremely if you have CO2 coming from your exhaust. So the higher the CO2, the higher the luxury tax, and luxury tax can in some more sporting cars be more than 60,000 euros. So you can imagine that's almost the price that the car is really valued, intrinsic value of that car. So you can imagine what happens, and therefore there is a trend towards different type of cars more fuel economy, but also towards electric cars, because they don't have that luxury tax yet. So they are out of that luxury tax, and which can make up an enormous amount of the total price paid for the automobile. So that's something that is now arising. And the good thing is that you can still have a lot of fun with electric car. I also had an electric car, Tesla Model S 90D. Really nice car. And it also has a sufficient range that you can go for longer trips to, for example, Amsterdam, from the southern part of the Netherlands where I live. So there are some things that you can, of course, consider. Other things to consider is that it does take some additional time if you have to supercharge along the way. Very often this is easy to be put into your schedule. You can work through some of your stuff on the accountancy part or administration or whatever, or do some emails. So that's a thing that you can consider, but it will take some additional time that you're away from home, just to put things into perspective to this degree. I hope that is something that you can also take into consideration. Also, if you go for an electric car, please understand that not all electric cars have the coverage that a Tesla has, because a Tesla has both the normal coverage of all the loading facilities and the speed loading facilities, but they also have their own supercharger network, which has the best coverage. And also in foreign countries, this is often very well done. In Germany, of the neighboring countries of the Netherlands, we have Belgium and Germany neighboring us. It was a lot less well established as, for example, Belgium, but the Netherlands, it's so fantastic coverage. So, long story short about electric cars, if you live quite close to your home, electric car is perfect because you can charge at home. If you have an alternative way to do the longer trips, where, for example, the second car can do that, then you're perfectly fine at where you are sitting now. If you don't have that, you will need a car that also has a decent range and can supercharge, or otherwise have a fast way of charging. Also, the cost of a Tesla supercharger are far less of that of other commercial suppliers, so they have an excellent deal there. So also please take it into consideration, even if you think that other cars might have a more luxurious feel. The performance of a Tesla Model S or Model 3 is perfect. Also efficiency is very good, and they have that supercharging network which is of high value if you have longer trips on a regular basis, where you also need this car for your holidays, for example. Okay, and then there are some other tricks that you can do with every car if you really want to. Those tricks are more towards the hypermiling. Of course, I also say there's a new way of driving, so that you just shift up at 2500 RPM at max, and then so once engine, you look at the RPM scale, you see it's 2500 RPM, you shift up to the next gear, etc. You don't go over that. And if you drive in the highest gear, of course you will have better fuel economy, because it operates on a lower. There was someone doing a stupid thing, and that's also a thing which you can consider. If you have security systems like this one in place, of course, still the responsibility is for yourself, but they will help you have a better effect and also be more alert of situations that could be dangerous. For example, what happened here, person just smashed his car onto the other lane and then had to brake. Yeah, that was almost standing still from 100 kilometers an hour, so that's quite dangerous, of course. So if you have a car that has such a security system in place, this can be of benefit. Also, a car which has parking sensors, because if you damage your car, this also will be quite costly. Not so much only on gasoline, but also parts are getting more expensive. And if you have a rearward camera, this can also help you. This also has this Suzuki Swift Sport I'm driving also has this sort of radar system at the back. So if someone is crossing, so you're driving rearwards, and someone is crossing the lane, he will also alert you. And these things are of benefit. Also, if you have good brakes, you saw the braking reaction. This will also help you, because you can, even if other cars are not able to brake, you are able to brake the distance. Please also take into consideration your rearwards mirrors to see if the persons behind you are also coping. Otherwise you might be able to flee to the side and just avoid an accident like that. But we were primarily focused at fuel consumption. So this is for electricity, diesel, gas, also natural gas. It's all the same. What they do with this hypermiling is that you have a low RPM to operate at. So the lower you keep the RPM, the better it is for the fuel economy. I'm not so much a pro for this, because I think also the engine needs to have some operating room to work in. So I would not get my engine below 1500, 1000 RPM on the regular for a long distance, but because I think it's too low, and you will stress the engine in another way. But of course it will lower fuel consumption. But 1500 to 2500 RPM, I think it's perfect for a car to operate in. Not a big deal. So that's a good way to approach this. But this will diminish the strain on the engine, so of course, but it will also inflate the tires to a high degree, and good inflated tires are good for performance as well. But if you inflate the tires too much, you will also make the tire, instead of this, more of a balloon at the bottom, and that will decrease, of course, rolling resistance, but also decrease the contact patches, and the wear on the tires will also be different. So the performance of the car, for example, braking, accelerating, and road holding ability will then diminish. But that's something that you could do, of course. Some people are also taping off the engine compartments. So next to the rolling resistance, they also try to decrease the wind resistance. That's something that you can do, but please take into consideration that depending on the driving style, so if you also combine this with this very low RPM driving style, the engine will normally not heat up that much. But if you will heat up the engine and it has no way to cool down, this is not a good thing, of course. But with a gentle driving style, you can cope with that. Another thing to consider is that if you look at extremely fuel economy cars, they often also lower the car a little bit, and the lowering of the car will also decrease the area where the wind has to fight against, so the CW value, and that's something that can help both performance, because the car becomes a little bit stiffer and lower to the ground, lower the center of gravity, but also can increase fuel economy. So that's something that you of course can consider. Also you can consider tuning your car. You can tune your car for performance, or you can tune your car for fuel economy. Oftentimes those tunes are quite overlapping, but the difference is that if you only tune for fuel economy, normally they will have a cutoff of a max RPM that you can go, and then the engine will just not go any further. So therefore how do you say this? You need to stay within that narrow range of optimal performance, and you will also decrease the top speed. So if you drive very fast, you will have less efficient mode of operation, of course. So that's something that you could do. I'm not a fan of that. I would rather tune my car normally, and if you stay at low RPMs, you still have the benefit of the fuel economy tuning, but you can also exploit the higher rev ranges for top speed and also performance. So then you have both, but it's just something to consider. If you have a fleet of cars, and you could buy, for example, the cheaper version that has less horsepower, and less torque, and then you can tune it for efficiency, so you still get a torque increase at the lower RPMs, but you limit it at the higher RPMs. Of course, you will decrease the wear of the engine, which is beneficial for the longevity of the engine, but also you will increase, of course, the fuel economy. So those are things that, from a company perspective, especially if you have an entire fleet, are of course to be considered. Other things to consider is that some people go for very cheap parts, and that could be something to consider, but very often it also cheaper parts are less quality. So would you really want to do this? There are also people that go for very hard compound on the tire, so the harder compound has less rolling resistance and also oftentimes will be able to be used for a longer duration of time, and less rolling resistance will again increase fuel economy. So there are things to consider. It will, however, harder compounds limit the grip to a degree. Hope this video helped. Foundry Car out.